Shaun, let's reflect on the Northern Ireland local elections. We've got Sinn Fein winning 144 seats. They're now the biggest party. The obvious question to ask, Shaun, is does this pave the way for a united Ireland?
Not necessarily, but I think the first thing, Camilla, to say is that what's surprising about the results from yesterday is the size of Sinn Féin's victory. I think we were all expecting probably they would edge ahead, but they actually increased their numbers so significantly. The DUP roughly stood still. And there's a lesson there for everybody, which is Northern Ireland is moving ahead. And I think one of the things you have to look at is actually the messaging in this campaign. Sinn Féin were talking once again about the cost of living, the kind of issues that affect people. And the DUP were talking about the protocols and the Windsor framework and issues, which most people, honestly, I think now in Northern Ireland, it's not what they're talking about at home. What they want is a Northern Ireland that is cheaper, a Northern Ireland that is safer, and they just want people to get on with their lives. They want the Assembly up and running. The Sinn Féin are saying, let's get the Assembly working. The DUP is saying, we're holding out. There's a lesson there, and I'm sure you can read it.
But Shaun, it is going to fuel talk of reunification, isn't it? It's inevitable. Sinn Féin are the largest party now.
Well, let's remember, it's the people who decide these things. It's the people who voted in these elections. And Camilla, I've heard you talk elsewhere. I remember when you were talking about so-called Beergate and sitting on the sofa with the now gone Philip Schofield and talking about, you need to kind of keep a pulse with the people. And the pulse of the people in Northern Ireland is they want to get on with their lives. And if they can't get on with their lives within the United Kingdom because unionism is standing in their way, then there's a lesson there too. I hope that doesn't happen because I think Northern Ireland should remain within the United Kingdom. But in the end of the day, the Good Friday Agreement gives people in Northern Ireland, if they choose, the right to have that referendum. My advice to the DUP and Jeffrey Donaldson is you need to get back on with politics in Northern Ireland. You need to get the Assembly up and running, and you need to show people that unionism isn't about a talking shop, it's about doing. And you need to get out there and do, because Sinn Féin are doing, and right now the DUP looks somewhat disengaged.
I mean, I'll be asking Arlene Foster, my fellow GB News presenter, about that a bit later. She's got her show at 11. Let's move on to Labour and Keir Starmer. I've made a point of the fact that you defected under Tony Blair. Presumably that was part of the reason why you decided to jump ship, that you found him an inspirational leader, I'm assuming. I'm wondering what your analysis is of Starmer by comparison.
I jumped ship because I couldn't remain inside a party that was so negative. And you remember Theresa May talking and characterising the party at that time as the nasty party. It was a really nasty party at that time. The Labour Party that Keir Starmer is running is a different party facing different challenges from the one that Tony Blair took on in 1997. We're dealing with a post-COVID environment. We're dealing with Britain having left the European Union. We're dealing with a cost of living crisis, and we're dealing with a bankrupt current government that's bankrupt almost in every single way. So Keir has a whole set of new challenges to take on. I think what's impressive, and clearly what's impressing the British people, which is why the Tories did so badly in the local elections and Labour did so well, is that Keir Starmer is presenting, whether it's on issues like housing, the cost of living, and all sorts of fronts, answers to problems that people actually want the government to be addressing, and which sadly the Conservative Party fails to do so.
I think you might be giving a bit more of a rosy picture than perhaps is the reality. Yes, they did much better than the Conservatives at the local elections, but they needed a 10% swing to form a majority government at the next general election. They only got 5%. When people are asked what they think of Sir Keir Starmer, the most overwhelming response is don't know.
Well, first of all, Camilla, look, let's be really clear. There's a huge mountain to climb. The Labour Party did so badly in 2019. There's an enormous mountain to climb. Most people thought this couldn't be climbed. The opinion polls at the moment, as you know, show the Labour Party ahead by 15% or so. The outcome in the local elections would suggest it's much closer to around 7 or 8%. And at that, they would certainly be the largest party at the next general election. Question is, will they have a majority? My hunch is that Keir is actually taking the party on a course to actually get a majority. But I also know, because I know him quite well, he takes nothing for granted. He's not going to stop working to win people's confidence until he wins the election. And then he's going to work very hard as the Prime Minister of this country.
If you know him well, what do you think of him doing a deal with the Liberal Democrats? Will he do that?
It's not about doing a deal with the Liberal Democrats. What he's doing at the moment, quite rightly, is not closing options. What he's saying right now is we need to get rid of this government. It's bankrupt. This government is failing people, and you can see that in the opinion polls, and that's not about painting a rosy picture for Labour. It's really clear that even though, and I do think, by the way, that Rishi Sunak is a very decent person, and he's not somebody who I think should be underestimated by any means. The problem is everybody else around him is pretty third rate and delivering badly for Britain.
But is the
and I think the country is looking at, and you can see it in the opinion polls, is looking at Keir Starmer and thinking that this is the right alternative for the future.
But Shaun, is this shadow cabinet first rate? Do you rate people like Annalise Dodds, Angela Rayner? I mean, you were in cabinets with people like Robin Cook and John Prescott, who are huge political personalities. So how does the current shadow cabinet compare with them?
I remember in the run-up to the general election in 1997, as you kindly have reminded people 2 or 3 times now, when I was then in the Conservative Party, people were pretty rude about the shadow cabinet at the time around Tony Blair before he became Prime Minister. I think people can be unkind about personalities at this stage. But the fact of the matter is, I think that we're going to see a Labour Party led by Keir Starmer win the next election. And I think people will be very impressed with the cabinet as it will become. I mean, friends like Wes Streeting as the Health Secretary, I think are going to be outstanding in their jobs.
And
I think that goes right the way across the board. I've known David Lammy for a long time. I think he'll be a brilliant Foreign Secretary. I think we're looking at a cabinet of quite broad talent, and I think Keir is going to be a very impressive Prime Minister.
Final question, Shaun. What about some of the policies, though? I mean, there's a suggestion he wants to build on Greenbelt land. That doesn't usually go down well with the electorate. He's talking about wanting more immigration. We've got figures coming out next week which suggest it could hit 1 million. He wants closer union with the EU. Well, that's not what the majority voted for, both in Brexit and indeed at the 2019 election. He wants to extend the vote to EU citizens. I mean, some of these policies just aren't going to be that popular, are they?
Well, I think that the first thing to say to you on housing is it's not popular that we don't have homes for people. We are short of somewhere in the order of nearly 4 million homes in our country at the moment. We should be building at least 300,000 homes a year, and the government's been failing on those targets and not even managing to deliver 200,000 a year. So it's quite right that Keir Starmer has put forward a policy that says we're going to actually back the builders, not the blockers, and we're going to give powers to English councils to free up Greenbelt. And before you caricature it too far, Keir's example, and it was very, very good on the Greenbelt, is that recently homes were built on a playing field and not a car park because the car park was in the Greenbelt. Yeah. And that is absolutely absurd. And if you look at other policies that Keir is talking about, I think actually he's talking the policy that most people in their homes are talking, which is deal with the cost of living, deal with getting our NHS working. It's unacceptable to be running the NHS into the ground. People want an NHS that works.